2, 3.
Come and See is an anti-war film released by Sovexport Film on October 17, 1985. Based on the novel Hatin by Ales Adamovich, the film was co-written by Ales Adamovich and Elim Klimov, who would direct the film. The film stars Alexei Krevchenko and Olga Mironova. Come and See is a fascinating film, if for no other reason than the fact it exists at all. Being a project designed to shed light on the horrors of war that took place in former Belarusia during World War II, this was a movie that languished in 8 years of development hell as attempts were made to push through the censorship of the Soviet state. The resulting film, against such odds, was a box office success in the Soviet Union, but until recently was a relatively unknown film overseas. Recent years have resulted in reappraisals of the film, with it now being considered one of the greatest, most important, and most brutal war films ever made. It must therefore be asked what this film brings to the table, and why after all these years, people have come to label it as a sum greater than its parts. In this review, we will visit the ghosts of the Ostfront, and see what tales they may have to tell.
Just as a warning to those of you who haven't seen this movie yet, there are major spoilers ahead. If you wish to see this movie for yourself, without having anything spoiled for you, please click off the video now. Now, without further ado, let's get into it.
The story begins in Belarusia in 1943, at the height of World War II in the Soviet Union. We follow a teenage boy named Fliora as he digs through the bombed-out remains of a battle, searching for a rifle so that he may join the local partisans in their fight against Germany. He finds one in the sand and brings it home, much to the shock and grief of his mother. His mother desperately attempts to convince him not to go, but before she can do anything to stop him, the partisans show up, and Fliora is taken to their forward base. When the detachment gears up and gets ready to leave, however, their commander, Kosach, orders Fliora to stay behind, forcing him to swap his boots with another man. Devastated, Fliora runs into the forest to weep, running into a woman named Glasha who is also there crying. The two of them get into a heated conversation, which leads to Glasha making an advance on Fliora. Fliora pushes her off him, berating her for acting stupidly. Just as Fliora is about to leave, though, the area is hit by German dive bombers, with paratroopers entering the clearing shortly afterwards. With the forward base destroyed, Fliora and Glasha flee further into the forest. They hide out for a few days before Fliora puts a plan into action. He and Glasha will return to his home village, where he will reunite with his mother and sisters. Then they will rendezvous with Kosach and the partisans. When Fliora and Glasha arrive at the village, they find it empty, with Fliora's family nowhere to be found. Suddenly, a thought comes to Fliora. There is an island in the bogs just outside of the village, where he is convinced that he will find everyone. Fliora takes off to find them, with Glasha not far behind. But as Glasha turns back when they leave the village, she sees a pile of human corpses. Distraught, she continues running after Fliora through the bogs, unable to bring herself to tell him what she saw. After a grueling and exhausting trip swimming through the bog to the island, Glasha, on the verge of a breakdown, tells Fliora what she saw. How his family is dead. Shortly after this, Fliora and Glasha are found by a partisan soldier who brings the two to the camp hiding the survivors of the attack. Still in a state of shock, Fliora ends up volunteering himself for a mission to go with some partisans to find supplies for the camp in a warehouse. The attack goes badly when they find the warehouse has been occupied by the Germans, and the four men are forced to flee. As the group journey through the countryside, 2 of the 4 men are killed when the group accidentally walks through a minefield, leaving Fliora and Squad Commander Rubej to continue alone. The 2 successfully rob one of the locals of their only cow, but as they try to make their escape, the group are spotted by a hidden German group and are fired at by machine guns. Rubej and the cow are both killed, leaving an increasingly flustered Fliora alone. After passing out from exhaustion, Fliora awakens the next morning and begins moving again. Fliora confronts one of the local farmers, demanding he hand over his horse-drawn cart and to bring tools to butcher the cow. While in the middle of the standoff, Germans begin to appear on the road behind them. Instead of giving Fliora up, the farmer helps him hide his gun and uniform in the field, bringing him back to his home village and telling him to pretend he is the son of one of the farming families. As the German inspection patrols come through, something unexpected begins to happen. Everyone in the village is pulled from their homes and is forcefully corralled towards the center of the village. All of the town's citizens are forced into the largest barn in the village as the Germans take up positions surrounding it. As the crowd in the barn cry out in confusion and despair, one of the German officers approaches the barn, making a simple offer to those inside. Leave out the window if you want to, but leave the children behind. Fliora timidly exits the barn out of the window, being dragged over to the area where the German officers and soldiers are drinking and partying. It is at that moment that the German soldiers, assisted by turncoat partisans, begin throwing grenades and Molotov cocktails at the barn. The Germans leave the people in the barn to burn alive, as they turn their sights on the rest of the village, burning everything in sight to the ground. As the Germans leave the town, now completely engulfed in flames, they stop, taking Fliora and putting a gun to his head for a photo, before leaving him behind to crumble to the ground in grief. Later on, we see Fliora meeting up with Kossach's partisan group, who have fought the German group from the town and taken several prisoners. As they question the captured Germans and turncoat partisans, many of the prisoners, including the ranking officer, make excuses for themselves. One German, however, admits to the deed. He claims he did what he did, ordering the townsfolk to leave their children behind, because with the children, it starts all over again. He says that their race spreads the contagion of communism, and that their mission will be accomplished, if not today, then tomorrow. Fliora brings a tank of gas to the prisoners, which they are meant to use to douse themselves. A struggle breaks out among the prisoners, with all of them frantically pushing through each other to get a hold of the gas. In disgust, the partisans gun down the prisoners where they stand, before packing up and moving out. As Fliora begins to move again, we see him come across a portrait of Hitler in the mud. Fliora aims his rifle at it and fires. As he does, a montage of Hitler's life begins to flash before his eyes, beginning with the final years of his life. As Fliora keeps firing, the montage goes further and further back in time, until finally, it ends with a picture of Hitler as a baby, resting on his mother's lap. Fliora lowers his weapon at the sight of this, tears in his eyes, as he moves to catch up with the partisans. The final moments of the movie follow the group of partisans as they disappear into the snow-covered forest. A title card appears, explaining how 628 Belarusian villages were destroyed during the war, and all of their inhabitants along with them. The first and foremost thing anyone should know about this movie is that it is incredibly morbid. It is violent, saddening, and seemingly tells its story without any semblance of direction. And that is why, as a means of illustrating the human view of the nature of war, the cost it has, and the toll it takes, this is one of the most impactful cinematic experiences you'll ever witness. The most striking feature of this film is its use of imagery. The film constantly complements what it has to say on screen with eye-catching and beautiful visuals that not only breathe life into the scenes, but also act as symbolism for the events we see unfold. The stork is viewed as a symbol of new beginnings in many cultures, and its appearance in the forest after Fliora experiences his first taste of war is a visual marker for Fliora's transition to a new stage of his life. The drops of water that fall in a well when Fliora returns to his village, the cow that Fliora and Rubej try to smuggle back to camp, and the extinguishing of a torch following the execution of the German prisoners all work to represent themes of changing views, fulfilling duty for the sake of others, and the fire that burns within those who fight for vengeance, respectively. Perhaps one of the most powerful instances of such imagery comes at the very end, where Fliora catches up to the partisans, blending in with the wall of moving bodies as they walk off towards an unknown fate. This final nail in the coffin of a boy losing his identity echoes far beyond the credits. While we got to see the most transformative moments of this boy's life, we will never know what becomes of him beyond this event, just as we will never know the full story surrounding this dark time in history. There are numerous other instances of symbolic imagery throughout the film, and they add a terrific contemplative aspect. But even if you don't register their meaning on a metaphorical level, you'll still have no problem understanding what this film has to say. The theme this movie presents about the price of war is something that will instantly resonate with anyone. But the story this movie tells to present those themes makes sure that you will feel the impact of those themes far beyond the story's end. The movie follows the journey of Fliora, a bright-eyed, innocent child who believes that he was born to uphold his duty to the land he calls home. His journey mirrors an entire spectrum of emotions across the movie's runtime. The first encounter with emotion this story provides is the upset and disappointment Fliora feels when he's left behind, ignored by those he looks up to. We follow Fliora as he wallows in juvenile sorrow after this moment, and anyone will instantly recall memories of their early life upon witnessing this scene. And this is only the beginning of the emotional turmoil. Panic, resolve, grief, helplessness, anger, and fear all flood the screen over the course of this movie, with every experience, whether it be the burning of an entire village or something as small as Fliora laughing hysterically at a German pilot throwing an empty bottle of booze out of its window. Fliora takes the audience through a wave of every emotion war invokes, and even a few we thought it couldn't, until by the pinnacle of the movie, both Fliora and the audience have nothing left to feel. By the time we get to the end of the violence, with the massacre of the German POWs, there's nothing left of Fliora for us to recognize. There exists only a shadow of a person who has aged a lifetime right in front of our eyes. With the flashback of Hitler's life, we see Fliora falling back through the emotions all over again. Every round he fires into that portrait, with every second of Hitler's life that passes in front of Fliora's eyes, invokes all of the desperation, grief, anger, and pain he had felt all this time, all over again. Yet when the flashback through Hitler's life lands on a picture of a baby, cradled in the lap of his mother, and the memory of the burning village returns over that, Fliora finally falters, and the circle is complete. The words of the captive German ring true. With the children, it starts all over again. Fliora began as no more than a child, letting himself get caught up in the nightmare, believing glory would be his reward. The path that led him to where he is now is the same path tread by so many before him, including the ones responsible for bringing such pain, and the cost that came with it is a painful reminder of how easily people are ensnared and consumed by the tides of war. The cinematography helps call attention to the events of this movie in a way that makes it feel less like a movie and more like a real event. The progression of this movie is framed to make everything you see feel like an experience, no matter how big or small the moment may be. First-person views, close-up shots, and panning shots all work to make moments like Fliora meeting Glasha, Rubej reading the propaganda leaflets dropped from a plane, and the moment where Fliora crawls out of the barn to the wall of German soldiers feel that much more personal and memorable. One fascinating trick you see displayed later on in the movie is that in some shots, the characters seem to be surrounded by a blurry fog, making them almost look physically separated from the shot they are in. This is something the scenes use to demonstrate the mental fog and fatigue a person is experiencing, and how they are removed from the things happening around them. The lighting of this movie also changes to reflect that, the early shots being bright and colorful, then slowly becoming more and more dull until the movie is 1D saturation away from being completely gray. The movie's commitment to the little things helps viewers to better understand just how felt the impact of what's really happening is. In keeping with the idea of moments, the dialogue reflects two tones. The smaller, more pleasant events of this movie are jovial, conversational, and expressive, made to amplify the emotional nature of such exchanges, while the larger, more intense events are rough, minimal, and cold in their delivery, signifying how people have mentally detached themselves from the despicable actions taking place. The dialogue does not focus on telling you what's happening, instead opting to let you feel the scenes for yourself, making the depiction of emotions on screen that much more potent and unforgettable. While the acting from the secondary characters perfectly captures the emotional turmoil and surreal moments that ground this movie, Alexei Krevchenko's performance as Fliora is the beacon that shines a light on just how detached war is from what we perceive it to be. Every tear he sheds, every laugh he lets loose, and every shout of anger is one that echoes in your mind. Whether it is the disappointment of being ignored, the determined resolve to find his family in the bog, his gnawing fear at being seated amongst the very enemies he was meant to fight to the death, and even moments like his uncontrollable laughter at the empty bottle being dropped out of the sky, all bring a level of emotional depth and complexity that rival even the most seasoned of actors. The only real issue that exists with this movie is that not everyone is in touch with their inner Slav. Subtitles or a dubbed-over version will be a necessary evil for those who are not linguistically inclined, and while this will certainly be an issue for some, it's not a reflection of the quality of the movie. The other issue some will run into is just how dark and grim the movie is. It is not as physically gruesome or repulsive as some movies in the genre, but you don't want to watch this film when you're in a good mood, because otherwise your spirits will be crushed harder than a shotgun beer at a frat party. Consider yourself warned. The final rating for this peek behind the curtain of history is 10 out of 10. Though by no means an easy film to watch, it soars high above many other movies that broach the topic of war, with acting, cinematography, imagery, and a story that are instantly moving and completely unforgettable. Whether you enjoy watching war movies or not, you can bet that this is a film that will stay with you forever. But please, for the love of God, go watch something light-hearted to clear your head after you're done. That should honestly be a prescription for anyone planning to watch this.
And that will be it for today. Thank you all for stopping by. If for whatever reason you enjoyed what you saw today, consider sticking around, maybe leaving a like or subscribing if you wish. And if you have any recommendations for movies you want to see reviewed in the future, be sure to drop those down in the comments. There's plenty more to come, so if that's something you care about, I'll see you when I see you.